Hello and welcome to the Dressage Anywhere podcast. Hello everybody, it's Ruth here from Dressage Anywhere, and I am absolutely delighted that today on the podcast we have Donna Case, who is the horse feed guru. Hi Donna.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Ruth.
Oh, you are so welcome. I've wanted to get you on the podcast for ages, and I know this is going to be a really good episode and really interesting. So for anybody who doesn't know Donna, or the horse feed guru, Donna is an independent equine nutritionist. We've worked with Donna on and off for a little bit over the last few years, and I know Donna through Rhea Freeman's Small and Supercharged group and the mastermind group. I think we're both members on that, aren't we?
Group. Yeah, the lovely Rhea. Hello, Rhea, if you're listening.
She'll be listening. She better be. So I thought it'd be really great to catch up with you, find out more about you and what you do. We can also touch on some recent conversations that we've had, which should be really interesting, and, just see where it takes us. So my first question is, and I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. Why is it important to work with an independent nutritionist?
Obviously, because I have worked as a commercial nutritionist in the past, and actually, I think that's really important to mention that, because I wouldn't be able to be independent if I hadn't worked commercially in the past. So what I mean by that is I kind of earned my stripes, if you like, through working for feed brands, worked as a care line nutritionist in the past, a competition nutritionist, and a racing nutritionist, so all different types of horses. But I think when it comes to our own horses, it can feel like such a minefield out there, and quite difficult for you to select or choose. And actually, it doesn't need to be difficult. So it's not actually difficult, but I can totally see why it is. And what an independent nutritionist does is they're able to look at all of the feed brands. So let's say, for example, you've only really got 2 or 3 that might be available for you to buy, or that your yard would be prepared to have in. Or on the flip side, you might be happy to go out there and buy any brand, it doesn't really matter, but I have all of that at my disposal. And rather than a feed company paying me to almost sell their product to you, I don't have that, because you're my customer, and all that matters to me is that your horse is in tip-top shape, feeling healthy, looking good, for you to be able to do what you need to do with your horse. And that's my job. And I think really the biggest thing about that is that because I'm paid by the client, I have the time. So most consultations are 45 minutes to 1 hour. I have the time to go through every single element of your diet. So that would be the forage, that would be the hard feed, that would be the supplements if necessary, or not necessary, because sometimes I'm telling people, actually, you are wasting money feeding what you're doing. And other times I can say, actually, there's this really useful supplement that could be of benefit to your horse. So looking at that, looking at the electrolytes, looking at the grazing, and it's like a whole picture. So you're getting almost this dietary MOT for your horse, but not only that, you're getting it explained as to why we're doing what we're doing. So you're actually learning more about feeding and helping you make future decisions. So that's probably a bit of a convoluted way of saying why an independent nutritionist is important, but really that's what I do.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, because it's only natural that if you go to horse feed company A, they're going to tell you all about their products and why you should buy those. And that might not be quite the right thing for your horse at that time, because companies B products, might be just what they need. So no, that certainly makes a lot of sense. You touched on working commercially previously, and obviously I know a little bit about your background, but I wanted to touch on some of the work that you've done there, if you're happy to talk about that, maybe with Team GB and all of that kind of stuff that you did. I've read all about it on your website, and it looks really exciting. But I mean, how do you get there? That sounds so cool.
Yeah, so basically I first started working as a nutritionist in 2002, so a long time ago now. That sounds quite scary when I say that, because that's going to be nearly 20 years, isn't it? My gosh, that's scary.
You have been doing it a long time.
But I first worked as a care line nutritionist. So the great thing about that was that I was in an office and I was surrounded by nutritionists that had more experience than me, because we don't start off. It's like horse riding or anything else. You don't start off, you get your degree. It doesn't make you the master of anything. It really doesn't. It gives you a good base to then be able to develop your learning more. So I was very fortunate in that I worked for a very good feed company, very well known in the UK. And I worked as their care line nutritionist, and all day long I would get mostly one horse owners phoning up asking what's best to feed. And like I say, not only that, but if there were any peculiar cases, of which there were many peculiar cases, something a little bit different, I had those other nutritionists that I could also learn from as well. So I did that for 18 months and it was a fantastic grounding. And then I went out on the road as a competition nutritionist. So I moved up quite swiftly, really, because then I was on my own, if you like, because I was out there on the roads, going into all these yards, and they were elite yards. So these were riders that effectively go to the Olympics and stuff. So there was a whole host, though, because I would also visit some riding schools and those sorts of things. So still seeing a really broad spectrum of horses, but ultimately responsible for a lot of those high-end competition horses that were using that feed company's products. And I did that again for a couple of years. And then that feed company had an association with Team GB and, one of the official providers. So as a result of that, I was called upon, because of the work that I did with the competition horses, to very much go to those squad sessions. So the world-class start and potential and performance squads, mostly in eventing and dressage. So that's what I did. And I did that alongside, because I was still employed as well. It was all part of that, alongside being a competition nutritionist. And then sort of between 2008, 2011, I also worked as a racing nutritionist. So that's obviously a totally different side of things. And so that's a bit of my past. And then obviously I decided to set up on my own, if you like. And here I am today.
And I'm mightily glad you did. I'm amazing achievements to have worked with Team GB and racing yards and everything. That sounds absolutely fantastic. But with you being independent, that's meant that when I called on you recently for a consult, we did some really great work together and figured out a whole bunch of stuff for my old chap, Jeffrey, who's 21 and getting a bit stiff and a bit old, bless him. And, we found those sessions really, really helpful. It's been really good for me. I've learned a lot I didn't know, because you don't really, especially if you have a horse on livery and, they're fed what they're fed at most yards.
They do get stuck in a rut. Like most people, if they're not too sure, and I think that really is the majority of people, land up feeding what they've always fed. And quite often that can be even what the horse was on before they bought the horse. So it just continues. Or if they aren't quite sure, they ask their riding instructor or what they use, which may not happen to be right for your horse. So I do think there's a lot of that. Yeah,
I think you're right. And I think you're right about getting stuck in a rut and you kind of just keep them on what you've always had them on, and don't really. And as Jeffrey has got older, he's been on the same thing for the last 11 years, and we've not really made any adjustments to that. We make some adjustments based on his level of activity. Sometimes if he's a bit sprightly, then we might cut some of those red nuts down a little bit for next time, or if he's lacking in energy, we might add in a bit more, but beyond that we don't really do anything else. So I think what would be really good to talk about is the process that you go through when you receive those initial inquiries and those reports from an owner and photographs and everything. What's the process that you go through to look at the horse's diet and look towards making some recommendations?
So, as you touched on there, Ruth, particularly with the remote consultations where I'm not out there in person and therefore just outright asking the questions, I do send questionnaires out in advance that have got a number of questions, which I'll talk you through now. And also I ask for photographs. It's about 5 or 6 photos that I ask for, which helps me start to go through the process. But the things that I'm looking at is obviously really simplistic stuff like, how old is your horse? Because life stage matters. Of course it does. If you've got an older horse, I need to know about it. If you've got a younger horse, I need to know about it to help me make those nutritional decisions. So that's a very simple thing. But I want to know things like, how much work is your horse in? And I get people to describe what they're doing. I want to know what temperament has your horse got? So by that, I mean, well, actually, are they quite laid back? Do you struggle to make them forward when ridden? Are they pretty chilled? Or actually on the flip side, can they be quite spooky or difficult or excitable? Because all of that has, again, an impact in the way that we'll choose to feed that horse. I want to know, and I can tell this partially from the photographs, what sort of condition the horse is in as well. Am I looking at an overweight horse here that I need to help lose weight? Am I looking at one I want to maintain weight, or one that needs to gain weight? So I'm looking at that side of things as well. A really important thing is the clinical, any clinical conditions. And that really is crucial, because if your horse has got a history of gastric ulcers or laminitis or PPID, which is formerly known as Cushing's, I could carry on with that list. There's all sorts of clinical things I need to know about it, because again, there's ways that we would feed for all of those things, or potential extra support that I could give. And then, I also want to know, well, what's your horse on now? What forage? Is it hay? Is it haylage? Can you weigh it for me? Or at the very minimum, describe it, although weighing is always better. And also hard feed. What are you giving? How much are you giving? Supplements. Again, so I can see what's happening at this point in time to have a baseline to know how to move forward, really.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. And when we went through that with old Jeff, it was really, really interesting. And the following conversations that we had about some things that, I had a very specific question about joint supplements, because he is slightly older and might need a bit of support. And he was showing some stiffness and a bit of lameness signs. So it was good to talk about that. But, we touched on absolutely everything about what he might be missing and what we could add in. And what I really liked, what was really helpful was, I made it quite clear at the beginning that this is the feed that we feed at this yard. And I'm kind of reluctant to change brands or strategy around that, but I'm happy to add some other things in if we need to. And you were totally open to that. And that's been super, super helpful for us.
Yeah. But on the flip side, if something wasn't right, I really would say, I would say to the owner, actually, this feed brand, for whatever reason, isn't working. But interestingly enough, when I spoke to you, I seem to remember that actually I know from the feed brand that you are using that actually you could change onto a slightly different product that would probably be slightly better for Jeffrey. But that didn't mean I needed to change you off the brand. So I could still do that, for example, without upsetting your yard.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing, really.
Mm. And there was a really interesting thing that you said to me as well, about adding a supplement into the diet, and particularly when there is a problem, it's a good time to add a supplement, because then you can see if it makes a real change and makes a difference. And I think as horse owners, we want to wrap them in bubble wrap and give them absolutely everything that we possibly can. And perhaps there is a danger sometimes of owners adding in too many supplements just in case something happens. But that really struck a chord with me.
Yeah. And I think, what I'll say about supplements, I will only add supplements if they need to be added. That's what they are. They're supplementary to the hard feed. And I won't add one without a reason. And I will always base that on science as well, and what scientific evidence there is to add that in. I do think it's important to remember that supplements are not drugs, though. So although we may be adding it because there is some sort of problem, it's not going to cure or mitigate that problem. But what it can do, what supplements can do, is support good health. So, for example, if we're feeding a high quality joint supplement, we can support joint health. So yeah, I will only add supplements if they need to be. And I guess when there is a problem, it is easier to assess what impact it is making.
So here's a question for you. As we're moving into winter, what kind of things should we be looking out for with our horses, nutrition-wise, and health-wise? And what are there any things that we can do to top things up?
Yeah. No, well, first of all, I mean, it's very simple, really. I always find it a miracle that I'm in this for a living, because for me, feeding horses is just such a simple job. And that starts with looking at your horse, looking at their body condition score, or if you're finding that tricky, taking a weight tape reading every week at the same time of day, and just sort of assessing, are they about right at the moment? That's the first thing you can do, because actually, if we're looking at the horse right now and it's overweight, this is a crucial time of year to help the horse lose weight, because we're not fighting nature so much. We've got the colder weather. We've typically got reduced grazing available to us, so we can work with nature, if you like. So that would be one major thing I would say, is that if your horse is overweight, don't wait to the spring. Don't bury your head in the sand. Take action now and start getting involved with that. On the flip side, if you do struggle with a horse that doesn't keep weight on very well during winter, it's a case of looking at where you are right now. Okay, what am I feeding right now? Sometimes it's as simple as you just aren't feeding enough. What is the manufacturer's recommended guideline for that feed? Because to be honest, a lot of us in the UK, because there are so many overweight horses, we're not necessarily feeding the recommended amount, which is fine, as long as we top it up with balancers or vitamin and mineral powders. That's fine, and what we need to do. But in these horses that perhaps now they're struggling a little bit, actually, could we just increase what we're doing before we start panicking over even needing to change the hard feed? And actually, have you changed that you're feeding ad lib forage? Because if you're still not ad lib, well, that's the easiest way to start making an impact through the forage. So yeah, it's about assessing where you are now. And then other things, this time of year, we tend to keep our horses in more. So respiratory health, and that's not just nutritional, that's management as well. So if you're noticing that your horse perhaps has a bit of a cough, can you be soaking your hay, for example, for 10 to 15 minutes? Is there any specific nutritional support that I can give to that? So we know there's some really good respiratory supplements available to us as well. But then get the management right too. Give that horse some access. So if it is forced into box rest, at least be walking it a couple of times a day. Get as much fresh air into that stable block as you can. And then also, boredom busting with horses that are stuck in for longer. Make sure that they never go for too long without their forage. Or what else can you do? I mean, we've got small hole hay nets. We can feed some from the floor. There's hay balls that are available to us. We've got forage replacers, partial forage replacers. So in that stable, if needs be, the horse can have more of a selection so that they can browse rather than just be stood at their net. So all these different things really that comes into play. And then also, if you have got a very difficult horse, perhaps just check that diet is right for that horse. And perhaps it is worth speaking to a nutritionist, because I see a lot of people on the wrong diet adding calmers. Perhaps they just needed to get onto the right diet. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes people are on the right diet and they just have a very sharp horse. But at least make sure that base is correct and run it past a nutritionist.
That's really interesting, actually. I hadn't thought about calmers or anything. I can remember years ago when Jeffrey and I were still fairly new together, and he used to be a bit sprightly and a bit overexcited when we were going into the competition arena, and it would put me on edge a little bit, and the whole thing would be a complete disaster. And I can remember giving him calmers or going into the arena. It was only unaffiliated dressage or something, just to try and take that edge off it. But actually, I think he was on 3 hard feeds a day and and a lot of hay. So, but I was completely new to horse ownership and didn't know a thing. And perhaps we should have looked more closely at all of that stuff before shoving him on a calmer. So we talked about weight briefly, and we've been talking about that separately earlier on about Jeffrey. But what are your top 3 tips for getting weight off a horse?
Yeah, well, the first thing is, like I say, almost see where you are first of all in that point in time, and what time of year is this as well? And the reason I say that is, if you need to lose weight, you need to lose weight irrespective, but the way that you go about it, although we go about it the same way, there's certain factors that we need to take into account. So for example, let's say during the summer months, your horse has put too much weight on. Well, we need to take action. However, we also need to take into account other things. So for example, did your horse put that weight on because he had access to way too much grass, and now that grass is gone? Okay. And now you're looking at this horse in front of you and go, well, you're overweight. I'm going to cut your hay back. And actually, is there still enough for that horse is what I mean. So yes, we may have to soak. We may still need to cut that hay back. But sometimes I have seen the fatal mistake of horses accidentally being starved, because what the owner forgets is the horse put that weight on when there was too much grass. Now the grass is gone, and actually the horse could do with some hay out in the field. They still need to be controlling how much hay there is because they're on a weight loss program, but you don't want to accidentally starve them. So that is one important weight loss tip. Think about when the horse put weight on and how the horse put weight on. And take this all into consideration. The second thing would be making sure the horse never goes too long without access to forage. So we never want to leave the horse more than 4 hours without access to forage. So we really want to be thinking about how we extend those eating times and how we give the horse enough opportunities. So, if you've got a very good doer where you're controlling the weight gain, sometimes just tipping a bit of hay in the morning and then again in the evening just isn't enough, because they've snorted it just too quickly and then they're stood for hours. So what can you do? Is there a friend you can ask at a different time of day, so that one net you put in all of a sudden is 2 nets, but it's more spread out? Could you use a hay ball? Could you use small hole hay nets? Could you soak to enable you to be able to feed a little bit more? So there's all those sorts of things. And then the third thing I wanted to touch on, which is quite often something that people don't like hearing, but I'm going to say it, is that quite often good doers, whether we like it or not, cannot take ad lib hay. Right. They can't. We'd love them to be able to. And don't get me wrong, there's some that can. So, you might have some horses where and if we can feed ad lib, that's obviously the perfect, that we love that, because it keeps everything nice and easy, nice and safe. But for these good doers, the energy level that many hays will contribute, they will not lose weight if they're given an ad lib supply, even throughout winter with no rugs on. And you could well find that your horse then continues to put weight on, and then they go into the next spring having not lost any weight. Next summer, they put more on, and we're in this nasty cycle now where it creeps up on you. And over a few years, all of a sudden, you've got a bullock in front of you and you're thinking, well, I've never done anything different. I've always done this. Why have I got this in front of me now? And it may have been a gradual thing. Some horses will just put weight on very quickly, but not all. It can be a cycle like that. So don't presume that just because it's winter and you haven't rugged your horse or whatever, that you can feed ad lib, because that is not necessarily the case. But also, we don't want to starve these horses. So if it feels all a bit difficult, best bet, again, speak to a nutritionist.
No, that's really interesting. What about feeding the competition horse? What are the vital things to look at for feeding a competition horse?
Well, I think, again, the first thing it comes back to, the very first thing I will always look at is, are they about the right weight? As simple as it sounds, because that gives us an indication as to whether we've got an oversupply of energy or an undersupply of energy, because all energy is calories. So if the horse is underweight, it's not got enough calories. If the horse is overweight, it's got too many. So how simple is that? That's the very first thing that I look at. In no matter, you could place a donkey in front of me and I'd still be looking at, is it underweight? Is it overweight? So that's the first thing, even with the competition horse. And then if it's underweight, or if it's overweight, I then look at the diet as a whole and go, right, okay, well, it's underweight, so I need to increase the energy supply. How can I do that? First thing, is it on ad lib forage? No. Okay, well, first tick, let's do that then. Let's see what we can achieve through the forage. And then secondly, moving that on to the hard feed, then what changes do I need to make to that? So in actual fact, it's an identical process, whether it's a Grand Prix performing horse or whether it's a donkey stood in the field. When I say donkey, I'm not being rude. I mean a literal donkey. Yeah.
You're not talking about Jeffrey now, are you?
I love donkeys. I absolutely love them. So, and then, of course, we've got other elements to consider. So, and I love working with competition horses, as you can imagine from my past. I love... particularly so with the dressage horses, how the feed can impact the way of going. So, for example, it's starch that can give a little bit more sparkle or a little bit more ping or presence that some riders are looking for. On the flip side, it's possibly too much starch, or the horse is a bit more sensitive if they show tension or spookiness or excitability. So I can tweak that element of the diet to try and get the best possible result for that horse and rider combination. So that is something else I'll be looking at. And then the other things, of course, are the vitamin and mineral supply. So a horse that's working at a very high level, working harder, is going to have a greater requirement for vitamins and minerals, in particular things like vitamin E, your antioxidants, because that they are under greater pressure because of what they're doing. Their body systems are under greater pressure. So I've got to make sure that the diet delivers what we need it to nutritionally. And then electrolytes as well, that it doesn't matter if it's winter, if that horse is sweating, we still need to make sure it's got the electrolyte replenishment that it needs. So it is very simple with just these elements thrown in that I need to check, really.
No, that sounds awesome. So for our consultation, the one about Jeffrey, we did that over Zoom because you're up in Newmarket and I'm down here in Hampshire, I think. And that worked really, really well. It was so helpful. But presumably you do go out and about on the road and to various different yards.
Yeah, I do go out and about. I mean, the great thing is actually, one good thing about COVID is that it has actually changed more and more people more than ever before, because they've got used to Zoom, are taking advantage of the remote consultations because they are a bit cheaper, because obviously I haven't had to drive out.
Yeah.
But I do go out in person, yes, and I do see horses, and obviously I can walk to your field and physically see your field, and have a good old prod and poke. But I would also say, please don't ever underestimate the power of a remote consultation, because they are really useful.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Heartily agree with that. It was so useful for me. I mean, the questionnaire that you sent me was incredibly detailed and I had to think quite a lot about what I was writing. And then you were very specific about the photos that I needed to take as well. And I think I probably took about 4 million before I sent a few over to make sure I had the right shots, that you could see his condition quite clearly, and build up a picture. But yeah, no, they're absolutely brilliant. Where can people find out more about you and all your different types of consultations and think about working with you?
Well, the easiest way is my website, and that's www.thehorsefeedguru.com. So even if you just type that into Google, the Horse Feed Guru, you should be able to find me. I'm on Facebook at the Horse Feed Guru. So again, if you look at the Horse Feed Guru, you'll find it. And again, on Instagram at the Horse Feed Guru. So those are the main places that you can catch me, and you can drop me a message, not a problem, ask any questions. Quite often people have questions before booking me, just to sort of firm up in their mind that it's what they want and what they need. But yeah, that's where I hang out.
Brilliant. Well, this has been really useful. Thank you so much for joining us, Donna. It's been great.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Dressage Anywhere podcast. Dressage Anywhere is an online platform where you can upload your dressage test videos and enter competitions with other riders from around the world. Find out more about us at dressageanywhere.com, Dressage Anywhere on Facebook, Dressage_Anywhere on Instagram, and Dressage_comp on Twitter.